Yeah.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Boston Sculptors Gallery. Thanks for coming this afternoon. My name is Almitra Stanley. I'm the gallery director, and today we're going to be hearing from three amazing artists. We have Ellen Schön, who is one of our artist members here at the gallery. This is her exhibition, Loftings. We're going to be hearing from Ellen first, and then we are going to move into the other space, and we're going to talk about Wen Hao Qian's show. And then, last but not least, Evan Morse is our guest artist down in the Launchpad project space, and he will talk to us about his work. Each of the artists are going to speak maybe about 20 minutes, and there'll be time for like a little Q&A in between, and also just for us to transition. For Evan's talk, I think it might be best if we don't try to all sit down there, but maybe you can speak in the other room and then people can go down and see your show afterwards, just because the space is awfully small down there. All right, well, I want to take a minute to tell you a little bit about Ellen, and I'm not very good at sort of ad hoc, so I'm going to read it.
I feel you.
Ellen Schön served as adjunct professor at the Fine Arts and Ceramics Studio supervisor at Lesley University College of Art and Design for 23 years. I'm just retired. Yay. She holds a BA from Marlborough College in ceramics and perceptual psychology, and an MFA in ceramics from Boston University's program in artistry. Schön has organized and co-curated several exhibitions locally and abroad. A member of the European Artists Association, she has participated in international artist symposia and residencies in Denmark, Finland, Croatia, Hungary, Turkey, Israel, and I lost my space, Germany, and Malaysia. Schön won the Brother Thomas Fellowship Award and the Artists Foundation Fellowship from the Massachusetts Council on the Arts and Humanities, and she was an artist fellow also at the St. Botolph Club. Her ceramic sculpture is held in the permanent collections of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and the Fuller Craft Museum in Boston. And this is Ellen and her show, Loftings.
Thank you all for coming. I know everybody has very busy lives, and so you made time to come to our talks, which I really appreciate. I want to thank Almitra and everybody at Boston Sculptors who's helped support it. You know, we're a co-op gallery, and it's a very supportive group. And Wen Hao, who's not here, she's not hearing me, but it was great working with Wen Hao. It was really a nice collaboration. We looked at each other's work during the installation. So I am also going to I'm going to talk, but I do want you to feel free to ask me questions, but this talk is really about answering all your questions, because during the opening, everybody said, well, how do you do this, how do you do this, how do you do that? And so I'm going to talk about the technical things and also the philosophical, the concepts behind it. So this is what people ask me. How did I get interested in 3D clay printing? I've been using 3D clay printing intensively in my art practice for the last 5 years. I first learned about it through Kate Blacklock's show of ceramic artists at RISD during a national clay conference called NCICA in 2015, and have been fascinated ever since. Since then, I've explored different 3D modeling software, teaching myself Blender by watching Jonathan Keep's YouTube videos during the pandemic, and taking in-person workshops with James Kuhn, Brian Zebus, Timia Tahanyi, who introduced me to Tinkercad, Fusion 360, and Rhino, and Blender. I guess I mentioned Blender. Jonathan Keep, a pioneer of 3D clay printing, calls this contemporary technology computer-guided coiling. Coiling is the first ceramic technique I learned, and probably the first ceramic technique ever invented during the Neolithic era 9,000 years ago. It's what we might call hand-guided coiling. I think of the ancient and contemporary versions of coiling as complementary. One is not a shortcut for another. When I started posting images of my new 3D clay printed work on Instagram, one of my friends said, "Oh, you're going over to the dark side." He was joking, but it is true that there is resistance in the ceramics community to using digital technology, an assumption that an object loses its soul if it's not handmade. As philosopher potter David Jones says, handmade is code for authenticity. Of course, it is essential to me as an artist to generate ideas and forms which feel authentic to me. But I have come to believe that hands in clay is not the only way to be authentic in the medium. After all, it's how an artist uses a tool which counts. Having a point of view, intention, and the ability to communicate interesting ideas and forms. Using digital technology does not preclude making by hand or combining techniques, as all of them are part of the ceramic continuum.
I realized I was supposed to be asking you questions.
Oh, it's all right.
Ellen, but how do you physically do it?
Thank you.
How
do I
you
physically do
do
it? So it's called digitally guided coiling. And if you look, I have the video on a loop of the machine that does it. I don't know if you want to show that.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, here. So this piece, what it's making right now is the piece that's actually right next to it. And it's a machine, it's a potter bot. And and believe me, learning this as an older person, it's like an old dog learning new tricks. It was not intuitive, but I've learned it enough so that actually I was able to teach a 3D clay printing class at Leslie my last semester. One of my students is here. So we did it. But anyway, it's a Cartesian printer. There's an X axis and a Y axis. And the tube full of clay, it's a soft clay, is on a Z. And the machine is sending out a Wi-Fi signal to my computer. So whatever modeling software I've used, I don't want to get into the total details, but I have to turn it into an STL file, and then I have to convert that into G-code so that the machine can read it. And then it just does it.
So you write the program on the computer?
I write it, well, I use the computer, but I can use a variety of different, what's called 3D modeling softwares.
Right. And then, I don't think people don't understand the connection between that and the printer. That's what I think would be interesting for you that they're connected.
Well, I mean, there's an interface that the printer has. I didn't prepare to show that interface. I am giving a 3D clay printing demo up at Manship Estate in Gloucester tomorrow, but also here on a week from Sunday. And I was thinking I could do that more, show that more.
Just mentioning it is a help for people to understand.
Yeah, so there is an interface with the Potterbot. Potterbot has its own interface where I can upload my file from whatever 3D modeling software I've used, which is turned into a special file that it can read. That's as much as I want to say.
Ellen, you have a really interesting palette. Color palette is very unexpected and fun and bright. And how do you get your colors?
Okay, thank you for asking that question. Because this is my third show at Boston Sculptors. And my first show I was just doing hand work. My second show I did a combination of hand work and 3D printed. But still my palette, I was trained started out in philosophy and then moved into clay. And the first person I studied with had apprenticed in Japan for 4 years. And I was introduced to him in his studio and wood burning kiln, and my aesthetic was a much more muted palette. And I decided, and I was a little bit afraid of color, let's put it that way. But somebody said, a gallerist actually said to me, you need color. And I was open to considering that because when you have something as an artist that you're sort of afraid of, or you feel like it's a block, you want to challenge yourself. And like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to jump into it. So for the last year, I've been just looking at color. I look color in nature, the leaves turning. I looked at people's paintings. I had, of course, read Joseph Albert's The Interaction of Color. And I looked at, psychedelic colors from the 60s. How do you get color that sort of shimmers? And then I'll pour a glaze on the inside, so the glaze is shiny. And then I will airbrush the exterior with what's called an underglaze. An underglaze is simply liquid clay called slip, pigmented with different colored stains. But this is a commercial product, and I can buy those slips, those underglazes, and mix them, and I spray them. In the ceramic process, there's 2 firings. You make the work. Clay is clay. It dries. I put it in a bisque kiln, so it's fired so that it's hard, but still porous. Then I glaze, and then I fire again to a higher temperature. So airbrushing the color, there was some surprising things about it, because you can think of a slip as kind of an opaque thing, but these were, because I was airbrushing and I was diluting the color, there was a lot of translucency, so colors came through each other, which was an unexpected nice thing. And the other thing that I did, well, I might get to this later, but I started small. I've been always, I started small and tested forms and colors, and then I scaled up. Okay.
Regarding your forms, some of them, are more of a, say, traditional vase-like form or vessel, but some of them are very complex and very abstract. Can you talk about how you get the ideas?
Yeah, thank you. So where do I get my ideas? I've always been interested, since I looked at Japanese ceramics, which were often named, interested in the ability of a ceramic vessel to point to something beyond itself, to function as metaphor. Ceramic vessels physically structured with necks, shoulders, bellies, and feet, that's what we actually call it in the biz, in the ceramics business, can evoke a gesture and anthropomorphized stance of the human body. They reveal deep aspects of human experience and of the natural world. Some of my 3D clay printed forms allude to the mathematical symmetry of platonic solids, and others attempt to capture the softer curvilinear forms of figurative totems. And just a little bit more about that. So my first show, I was looking at, like Venus of Willendorf and those type of fertility totems. My daughter was pregnant at the time, and those, very voluptuous forms were appealing to me. But I found out a friend of mine who's an art historian said, and I was making mine like 30 inches tall. She said, well, they actually are pretty small. They're quite small. And I thought, when I was getting ready for the show, it's okay to work small. I can work through ideas quickly. But I've always been, this is a vessel, but it's sort of also an abstract figure. So I've been drawn to the vessel aesthetic, but I'm also drawn to the more sculptural aesthetic, where the pieces are not the same on every side. And this is something, what's new for me is that I finally be able to learn Rhino well enough to start doing things that really start to feel like me. I'll just admit that. And if you ever really want to learn Rhino, take a class with Dennis Sideronos at MassArt. He's a member here, and he's awesome. Okay.
Process.
What?
Process.
So my approach to process, yes, thank you. A painter friend of mine says that being an artist is an act of faith. I agree. It's a leap of faith to trust the creative process. You start in one place and you're not sure exactly where you'll end up. I begin by working small scale prototypes. I test the ideas for form and color and then scale up. I often work in a series, developing forms from one piece to another. A series is a group of related pieces, like a family. And an example of this in my show is the maiden, the mother, and the crone. It's on this wall. So you can see they're similar. I actually started with similar shapes, a four-pointed star. And then I lofted it in different ways. I'll explain what that is. But they're essentially, one form is building on the other. So, I enjoy the process of discovery working in clay, whether it's by hand or not. But when I started out working with a hand-built piece, a change in one aspect of the form affects the whole piece. Thus, I find myself working my way around the form, making aesthetic decisions in conversation with the material until the piece is complete, until I decide it's done. So lofting, and I'll get back to that in a minute, but lofting, the name of the title of the show, refers to the process of creating a surface by connecting a series of virtual curves in Rhino, a 3D modeling software. So I draw the curves. I can draw my own shapes, or I can use geometric curves, or a combination of both. And then, did I get rid of that part? Hold on a second, sorry. So I must have deleted the actual thing that lofting is. So what lofting does, it creates a surface combining those curves to create a form. You draw the things, you stack them virtually. I can stack the space between them. I can look at the silhouette and imagine, this sort of, some of my forms, I'm still looking back to, ancient Japanese pots. These are my contemporary interpretations of them. Anyway, and then you say loft, and then it creates a skin connecting. And that's often a surprise, but if I like it, I can keep it, but I can keep working with it. I can manipulate that many, many times. Okay? So lofting is also a metaphor for growing forms, launching new ideas, and my growth as an artist. That's why I chose the name. So this next question, how is my approach to process different when I'm designing on a computer? And my answer is, it's often a surprise how a computer image of form translates into clay, the materiality of clay, how clay responds to gravity during extrusion, its viscosity, the softness and hardness. You can't see any of that on the computer screen. But I can still have a conversation with the material on the screen, manipulating virtual forms in myriad ways before printing them. One question I've been asking myself is, in what ways can I bring my tactile sense of form, the sensuality of clay, into the digital sphere? So, and I did say this in my artist statement, there's an interesting tension between control in designing on the computer and chance in printing clay. Unexpected variations of surface texture from accidents in the 3D clay printing process give warmth to CAD forms. I welcome these random events in process. 3D clay printing has stimulated discovery in my work, expanding possibilities of scale and of more complex forms. However, there is an extra step in making work using digital technology. Rather than manipulate the clay directly by hand in the moment of making, like in that conversation with an actual piece, if a piece prints a way that I don't like, or if a piece collapses in the printing, which sometimes happens, I have to go back into the modeling software to change my design, and then print it again, test it again to see if it works. So there is an extra step. That's the real difference.
So between scale of the two, like you can run an automatic scale up once it...
Well, it's not automatic. I can change it. So there is something, I haven't talked about this because I didn't know how much technical stuff, but there's something called either Cura or Simplify 3D, where you can adjust the proportions. I can adjust the Z, the Y, or the X. I can change it completely. I can keep it uniform, like in the example of this piece and this piece, I kept it uniform, the proportions. But in the example of, it's hard to show, these little guys over here, these are actually, this is the bottom of this. This part here, I mirrored it. And then, but this one, I kept just the bottom, and then I stretched it in one direction. So, you know, I stretch this a little bit too, but not as much. But I have fun playing with the proportions and seeing how that changes the expression, and also how color changes the expression. So, for example, this piece is porcelain. This is a porcelain piece that I did in 2023 up at Haystack, if anybody knows Haystack. And I left the color plain because I really liked the structure of it. But I scaled up. It was a little different proportion. The bottom on this one is a little wider than that. But used color, and it changes it a lot. Plus, what an unexpected thing, and I'm always looking for sort of unexpected things, is the fact that this was so big, you could look inside it, and you could see the structure of the printing inside, and the relationship between the colors, the wet color on the inside and the lip, and the dry color on the outside, which I think is a nice contrast.
I wanted to say, Ellen, that like 3D printing, right, it does give you the ability to make these in multiples and
Yeah.
editions, but I think you've chosen not to do that, and
It's
it'd
something-
be interesting to hear why.
Yeah, so it's something that people started to ask me, well, will I make editions? And so then it's something I have to consider. Now, when I first started doing this, I first started doing little cups and mugs and little vases, and I thought, oh, because, you know, years ago I used to be a production potter, and I thought, wow, this is a great way to do this without hurting my body. But then, and I might still do a few limited editions of small functional pieces, but I really want each piece to be unique. And if I'm moving in the sculptural direction, I don't necessarily want to, you know, repeat myself. I mean, somebody asked me, could I make a piece, the same piece in a different color? And I wasn't sure what to say, but I emailed them and I said, I understand you want to commission a piece based on something you saw here. Tell me what you have in mind. And I never heard back. So, you know, I'm willing to have a conversation about it, but and also, by the way, I talked to my mother, who's a public art sculptor, and she said, don't do editions. She said, because she's done editions. You know, she did the Make Way for Duckling Ducks, and she did an edition of 250 small maquettes of the ducks. That was, yeah. She said, well, she ended up stopping after about 200 anyway, because everybody wants them to be exactly the same, and they're not ever exactly the same. And that's something that's interesting to me about these, actually, that when you reprint, it's not exactly the same.
Yeah, they have funny little blips.
There's blips, and there's something back here. I don't know if you can see it. I'm going to come right back here to Klaus and Vicky. So this is a piece. This piece is a scaled-up version of that little maiden over there, and I used two shells. I used two walls, and actually you can't see it here, but I think it's on this side. It is. It's on this side. You see, there's a little seam, and then there's stuff that happens here, and then and that's all artifacts of the printing process, which I decided to keep. It's what makes it unique. I also, you know, sometimes I'll add hand-built elements to the feet. I paddled this a little bit so it was curved. There are things I want to do to emphasize the sensuality of the clay. There's another piece like that. I know we're running out of time, but there's another piece that an accident happened here. This piece, it started to collapse. Because the clay responds to gravity. If you go beyond a 45-degree angle, it starts turning into spaghetti, right? Because the weight is going to pull it down. And so this started collapsing up here. So I just took all of that stuff off, but I left this because I just thought, oh my God, that's just such a beautiful line, you know, on the top. And it started separating, and I just, you know, I emphasize that. So if I want to make them as unique as I can and embrace those accidents and use them if I can. If I can't, you know, I smash up the piece and redesign it and do it again. That's just
One last thing.
one last thing.
When I met you, I think you were just starting to do the 3D printed pieces, and you had a show that had hand-built work as well. But what, like, have you missed getting your hands dirty, so to speak?
Well, my hands are always dirty anyway. So that is the question I get. Do I miss working with my hands? The thing is, I am still working with my hands. I use my hands all the time. I wedge the clay with water. The clay has to be a certain consistency to fit in that tube. It has to be softer, not slip, but like, as I said to somebody, like cheesecake. It has to be on the soft side to print. I load the clay into the printer tube, that tube there, and that's about 15 pounds of clay, which I'm, you know, I wedge it up and then I'm pressing it into that tube, although there are other ways to do it, but I do that. And then, and after printing the forms, I add hand-built elements. I add slab bases, and I'm slipping and scoring, which is a traditional way of attaching. I can attach a foot or, you know, a handle, for example. And this is something I'm interested in pursuing, I can join, you know, more than one 3D clay printed piece to another one, or to another, a piece made with another technique in clay. As long as it's the same clay, you know, at the leather hard stage, I can do that. So I don't feel limited by it, and I don't really feel like I'm missing it. And glazing and firing are the same as in handmade ceramics. So, like I said before, clay is clay. But I do have to do that extra step. I can't manipulate the form as it's printing, although some people do, actually. I'm not doing that. And I just want to say, I've taken a couple of workshops. I worked at Haystack, I did this work with Tina Tahani. But at Watershed Ceramics up in Maine, we had a digital clay cohort, and there were 17 of us, and every single person was doing something completely different with digital technology with clay. So, you know, it's just like any technique, it's how you use it.
And you could smooth these out. I like that you don't, but you could put the
Right.
artist's hand in by
Right.
smoothing, right?
Right.
But you're letting us know that it was mechanically.
Right, and that is the other question I forgot to put in, that people do ask me, do you need the lines? And I think the way I'm using color now with these lines sort of makes the lines worthy, you know, like part of it, part of the piece, because they're almost like they make you follow the form in a certain way. But there are times when they might be just not work as well. And so I have, in fact, you can sand them away, or, you know, and you can see on some of these pieces, like this, either the zipper variation or this one even, that the glaze fills in the lines. And then because of the molten glaze in the heat of the firing, gravity is pulling it away. So you see the structure of the 3D printing there, but not here. So, yeah, so it's something, again, these are all considerations, and I don't like to make a rule about it, but right now I'm happy with them. And the other thing I just want to say is because every clay process has its own skin. You know, if you're wheel throwing, you have finger rings. And if you're doing a slab, you can stretch the slab, or if you're coiling, you have little pinch marks, or whatever. I mean, so, I mean, I'm enough of a traditionalist in a way that I'm honoring what the clay is doing with this process, but, you know, again, you don't have to. Something else if you want. I'm looking.
I have a question about scale up.
Yeah.
So right now, probably it's a whole piece, right, for the size. Would you, will you consider even bigger scale so you can print parts
Yes.
cut and then somehow glue them together.
Yes, I've been really thinking about that a lot. So I have a piece right now up at the Manship Estate in Gloucester that's stacked. It's called Blue Spiral, and it's stacked pieces. There's a tube in the middle that holds it together. And there are considerations. The size of the nozzle, if you're going to make something bigger, you might have a bigger nozzle. You might use clay that's has more grog in it, that's stiffer. But you know, they do use 3D printing. They do cement printing to make houses. You know, they're doing a lot with 3D printing, large scale. And I am involved with this digital clay group that I met at Watershed, and we're trying to organize something in New Bedford with the robotics and research lab because they have these huge robot arms, and I would love to be able to experiment with large scale and also stacking, and maybe this is my next step. I'm thinking for the next show to, put pieces together in different ways, different images together. Does that answer your question?
And I'm thinking that, just because of the way time is going, that maybe if other people have questions for Ellen, they could stick around and ask after. Because I want to make sure that all the artists get a chance to speak their allotted time, and some people are coming especially to see each artist as well, so I want to respect that. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Anita.